You may not realize it, but our culture is engaged in an all-out war to destroy the concept of absolute objective truth. Let me explain what that means. There are two different kinds of truth. On the one hand, there is subjective truth, truth that is subject to an individual's preferences, desires, and opinions. Take the phrase, vanilla is the best flavor of ice cream, as an example. Everyone would agree that is subject to my own personal desires and opinions, right? It's also called relative truth because it's relative to an individual's circumstances or situation. So when we're talking about the best flavor of ice cream, then it's true, it's valid enough to say that what is true for me may not be true for you, right? But there's another kind of truth, objective truth. And objective truth is the exact opposite of subjective truth. It's not subject to any individual's personal preferences, desires, or opinion. It is objectively true whether anyone wants it to be true or whether anyone believes it is true. It's true because it corresponds to reality. It says it like it really is. Here's an example. This book is red. Doesn't matter what your personal desire is or your opinion. No, it's still red. Doesn't matter if you've never seen the book or I never told you that it was red. Would it still be red? Yes, it would still be red. Even if you hated the color red, would it still be red? Yes, it would still be red. Now, this is also called absolute truth because it is true absolutely independent of any one individual's circumstances or situations. Let's say you had an ocular condition that prevented you from being able to discern colors. Would this book still be true? Or would this book still be read? Yes, this book would still be read. It is objectively true. It's absolute objective truth. So these are the two types of truth, subjective and relative on the one side, and objective and absolute on the other side. Now, here's where the battle line is drawn. There's a large movement in our culture to deny that absolute objective truth exists. And we're being conditioned by media and society to believe that all truth is relative truth. What you believe may be true for you, but it's not true for me. It's all just a matter of personal preference, desires, and opinions. There's no real absolute objective truth. And the very idea that truth might be absolute and objective is repugnant to some people. As Os Guinness said, at first sight, the biblical view of truth is obscene to the modern mind. It's arrogant, it's exclusive, it's intolerant, it's divisive, it's judgmental, it's reactionary. In other words, if all truth is relative, then what right do you have to impose your beliefs on me? You're being judgmental. Does that sound familiar? People who believe that all truth is relative truth are called relativists. But there's a fatal flaw in relativism, and here's what it is. You cannot live in a world without absolutes. You cannot do it. Even relativists can't even live in a world without absolute. Listen to this statement. There are no absolutes, but that is an absolute statement. So the relative has to say, there are no absolutes except this one. It is absolutely impossible to live in a world without absolutes. It's like trying to have your feet planted firmly in midair. It just doesn't work. So the next step for relativists is to retreat to nihilism, which says there may be absolute truth, but we should not presume to know what that truth is. Nihil is a Latin word for nothing, which means we can't know anything for sure. But this argument can't even get off the ground because if we cannot know truth, then how can we know that we cannot know truth? But it's interesting that whenever people follow this line of reasoning, it's usually only in regard to religion and morality, not math and science. When's the last time you heard someone try to reject the idea that 2 + 2 = 4? Well, that may be true for you, but it's obviously not true for me because to me it equals 2. That's just absurd. Or how often do you hear people try to deny the laws of physics? Oh, the law of gravity may be for you, but not for me. That would just be absurd. Now, there are some people who philosophically are nihilist, and they would even deny that. But most people who try to reject objective, absolute truth are what we call moral relativists. And what they want to do, and I think what our culture wants to do, is to take religion and morality, take it out of the sphere of absolute, objective truth, and push it into the sphere of subjective, relative truth. And just say it's all a matter of opinion. Whatever you want to do is fine for you. And sadly, I think it's working. Because when Christians are asked, why don't you share your faith? You know what the most common response is? because I don't feel like I have the right to push my beliefs onto other people. Now, some people just don't like to be confrontational, and they fear any kind of confrontation, and that's one thing. But a lot of Christians are genuinely believing that they have no claim on truth. Many Christians are buying into the idea and believing that absolute truth is somehow closed-minded. Well, let's all just have an open mind. And an open mind is very important, but we have to ask the question, what is it open to? G.K. Chesterton made a great point. He said, an open mind is like an open mouth. It's meant to be closed on something. So yes, we should all have a mind that is open to the truth and pursue the truth. And once we find the truth and it's within our grasp, we should close in on it and never let it go, lest we be deceived by error. This idea that we should be perpetually open-minded is really kind of silly. It might be the case that some people have had their minds open so long their brains have fallen out. That was just a joke. You're welcome to laugh at that. But some Christians are buying into this truth claim of our culture that all religions are essentially true and equally valid. And a classic example is Oprah Winfrey, whose influence on our media and our society is undisputed. And she has said several times that one of the reasons she rejects Christianity is because of its exclusive claim to be the only true way to God. And in her mind, that is the most arrogant claim anyone can make. Of all the religions in the world, how can one of them claim to be the only true religion and reject all others as false? She just couldn't accept a religion that made such a claim. In her mind, all religions ought to be open to say all religions are equally true and valid. But here's why Oprah is wrong and why all religions cannot be equally true and valid. Because to make such a claim is to violate all the fundamental laws of logic. Every religion makes exclusive claims. Every religion claims to be the only true religion and that all other religions are false. Christianity just happens to get bullied around for it, and all the other religions get a free pass. But every religion makes exclusive claims. Now, if something makes an exclusive claim, it is mutually exclusive, because all religions at the core are not fundamentally the same. They are radically different and opposed to each other. And so if you took all of the world religions and lumped them together in one entity and tried to make some kind of coherent whole out of it, you would have something that would be grotesquely self-contradictory. It just wouldn't work. It would be like having a square circle. It's impossible, because if it's a square, then it cannot be a circle. And if it's a circle, that precludes the possibility that it can be a square. And so it is with religions. If the claims of Christianity are true, then necessarily the claims of all the other religions which oppose it must be false. If the claims of Islam are true, then Christianity and all the other religions must be false. They cannot all be true. They can all be wrong, but they cannot all be true. So when someone tries to say that all religions are essentially the same or all essentially true and valid, it's as R.C. Sproul used to say, that's just manifest absurdity. It's logically impossible. And that's why taking this God quest together to investigate whether what the Bible teaches is true is so important. I don't think it is possible to overstate just how important truth is. If truth is undermined, then everything is undermined. And Paul makes this point very clear in the first chapter of Romans, which we read earlier. He is speaking to Christians who are living in the middle of a morally decadent society. And he's trying to explain to them why everything around them looks the way it does. Why is the world such a mess? Why is there so much evil in the world? And so he begins in verse 18. He says, "The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth." And he's going to go on to make an argument that truth is like the peg on which everything hangs. And if the peg falls, everything falls. So God's wrath is being revealed against men who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so men are without excuse. So the truth that God exists is clear to all of us from the evidence of creation. So where did we go wrong? And he continues in verse 21, "For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile, and as a result, their foolish hearts were darkened. There's that correlation between what we think or believe and how we act. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools. And here's the result of their foolish thinking or foolish believing. He said, therefore, God gave them over to the sinful desires of their heart. Subjective truth. He gave them over to the desires of their heart, to sexual impurity for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie. And then Paul goes on to describe what happens when we turn away from truth. What happens if the peg on which everything hangs is yanked out from underneath it? He says, because of this, God gave them over to shameful lusts. Even their women exchanged natural relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, the men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men committed indecent acts with one another and received in themselves the due penalty for their perversion. Furthermore, since they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, he gave them over to a depraved mind to do what ought not to be done. They have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents, and they are senseless, faithless, heartless, and ruthless. Although they know God's righteous decree and that those who do such things deserve death, they not only continue to do these very things, but also approve of those who practice them. That's quite an indictment, isn't it? Here is Paul's point. What led to all of this? What led to all the decay, the decadence? He says in verse 18, it's when we suppress the truth. Because if you deny absolute objective truth, if you say there's no real right and no real wrong, the only thing we have left to fall back on, as Paul said, are the desires of our heart. Every person doing what he or she thinks is right for them. But the picture Paul paints is very clear. If we allow truth to be abolished, then all of society will degenerate into mere conjecture, to chaos and meaninglessness. Here's what Os Guinness had to say about why truth matters today. He said, it's because of truth that our faith in God is not irrational. It's not an emotional crutch. It's not a psychological projection. It's not a matter of wish fulfillment. It's not an opiate for the masses. Our faith goes beyond reason because we as humans are much more than reason. But our faith is a warranted faith because we have a firm, clear conviction that it is true. We are those who think in believing and believe in thinking. And he goes on to say, shame on those Western Christians who casually neglect or scornfully deny what our Lord declares, what the Scripture defends, and what many brothers and sisters would rather die than deny, that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Truth is important. And it may not seem like we've covered much ground in our God quest, but really this is the most important. Because as I said, it is the peg on which everything else hangs. We can have all the reasons we want, but if we don't believe in truth, then none of it even matters. Ravi Zacharias gave a talk one time to American military servicemen, and he told them that the most important thing in the world was truth. Nothing is more important than truth. Afterward, the army chaplain approached Ravi and said, you just told them that nothing is more important than truth. I'm going to give a sermon tomorrow and contradict you and say that nothing is more important than love. And Ravi just looked him in the eyes and said, does it matter if what you just said is true? Let me just close by leaving you with this one last thought from Os Guinness. He said, this is what it all boils down to. If our faith is false, it would be false even if the whole world believed it. But if our faith is true, then it would be true even if the whole world were against it.